And we're live. Thank you for coming back for yet another episode. Don't hate us. Doc's still here at this time. One of these days, she's going to find a better hobby, but until then, she's stuck with us. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. Mostly that's just Doc, the dysfunction part. But without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Marshall J. Moore, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers. And for the record, I have to say, as far as introductions go, your bio had me laughing.
So I guess I better recite it word for word then, huh?
I mean, or just paraphrase. It's cool.
Paraphrase works too. All right. I am Marshall J. Moore. I am an award-winning fantasy and sci-fi author who was born and raised on a tiny tropical island, trained in mercenary and unarmed combat, and once sold $1,000 worth of teapots to Jackie Chan, and was once tracked down by a bounty hunter over a matter of overdue library book finds.
That is awesome. Okay, so bounty hunter. Did you get to go hand to hand with him just for the fun of it?
She called me on the phone and was very nice about it, all things considered. But
now I'm picturing Dog the Bounty Hunter showing up and you get to wrestle him.
That would have made for so much more of an entertaining story.
So they really sent bounty hunters for $300. They probably paid more for the bounty hunter.
I mean, probably so. They take their overdue fees very seriously at the LA Public Library, apparently.
I'm sure.
Well, that's LA.
A strongly worded letter probably would have gotten the point across a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Now I know to check my spam folder in my emails is the upshot of that story.
All right. And so the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we first met them. So this is one of the ones where Doc said, be here. I've got it scheduled. So here I am, and it is scheduled. So Doc, how did you first find Marshall?
So the lovely Jay Boyce came bouncing up to me and was like, here, meet this guy, right after boinking beasties at Dragon Con, which I think really should be qualified with. They should be single when you do that after that panel. But no, I'm kidding. Yes. So we met then, and then in the haze and blur of Dragon Con, things got crazy. But I did also find him on TikTok, which he has amazing, wonderful TikTok videos that are both educational. And honestly, watching him scramble and run through a bookstore trying to buy books is hilarious and adorable all at once.
I liked his...
We all got to get our exercise somehow.
I liked the one you did where it was iconic books set in every state in the Union. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, we just finished that. There's some controversy there because people have strong opinions about their states and their books.
Yeah, so the other one was it came up in the pre-show, dear listener, but I thought that the TikTok was pretty cool. I like the way he did it. Apparently his students found it when he was substitute teaching and they think he's cringe. So you should check it out. Links in the show notes and you can tell us what you think.
I'm over 30. Of course I'm cringe.
Fair enough.
Anything over 30 is no longer cool these days.
I remember back in the day when I thought 30 was old. What an idiot I was.
Fair, you still think 30 is old. Then you remember you're over 30.
Yeah, I don't do the math, remember?
It's the head trauma. It's okay.
Sure. We'll pretend I was good at math before. Whenever I get it wrong, though, I don't mention the TBI. I just tell people public school math. I did public school math.
There are some good teachers in public school, but we're going to go on to the religion questions. You ready?
I'm so ready.
Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I was raised Star Wars, but married into Firefly.
That counts.
Yeah, conversion by marriage.
Conversion by marriage, it happened. So what was your favorite character in Firefly?
It's kind of, okay. It's a toss-up.
Keep in mind your wife might listen. So, I mean, just bear that in mind.
Oh, she's in the room. It's a toss-up between Simon and Wash.
Okay.
Those are the two I relate most with, anyway.
Okay.
I could see that.
Mal. I like Mal.
I mean, Mal's, the star-making role for Nathan Fillion, such as it is. God, no, that show's so good. How can you pick a favorite, though?
He's as irreverent as all of us. Yeah, she's pretty cool, too. She was on my list. Mal's as irreverent as all of us wish we could be and get away with, but sadly, life and bills kind of prevent some of that.
Yes. Yeah.
I also
we
like
should
their
all aim to misbehave.
yeah. I also like the iconic theme song they came up with for that.
I mean,
Can't take this
I
guy from
read
me.
some. Oh no, it's so good. I read that Joss Whedon came up with it in like 10 minutes or something, and they just like recorded it on the spot. Like,
Wow.
yeah, it's so good.
Okay,
So
that's
we're
cool.
we're going to ask you, and I have a feeling since your wife is in the room, she might have a Nerf gun ready in case you answer wrong on this next one. Game of Thrones, Wheel of the Time, or Willow?
Game of Thrones. I am sadly not really that exposed to either of the other two, to be fully honest. I think it might be a generational thing. I think I was just a little too young when Wheel of Time was big, which like I know it's been ongoing for X many years, but I
It
was
definitely hit a peak.
yeah, exactly. And I think I was like just on the cusp of being a little too young for it when it was at that like huge stage. So by the time I did encounter it as an adult, I was like, I've seen these tropes before.
So we try to pick ones that were both books and iconic on the screen, so that way we kind of catch everyone. So Game of Thrones is easy because of HBO made a thing, and then whatever. That's really grimdark though, so that's not everyone's cup of tea. Wheel of Time is somewhere sort of in between, and it did have the recent TV show that everyone loved to hate. So I mean, they hate watched it. And then Willow, I was thinking of the original in the books, but apparently they've got a new one out, like revisiting the world years later. But Wheel of Time, I just couldn't get into.
Yeah, like I said, I feel like it was just one of those things where, like, if that had been one of my early introductions to the fantasy genre, I would have eaten it up. By the time I got to it, I was like, "Oh, a Farm Boy original," which.
But I did meet the author, which was kind of cool.
Oh,
he spoke at my college English department. Yeah, he spoke at my college's English department.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, that's really cool. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a phenomena for a reason. Just
absolutely. And like you said, we try to pick things to balance. We used to have the Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, and Lord of the Rings, but it's kind of unfair to put anything against Lord of the Rings, I think.
Yeah, like
so we had to try to mix it up. I don't think we found the perfect like trio yet to go with it.
I'm
but
not
we'll get
sure
there.
that there's going to be a perfect trio, to be honest.
I mean, maybe Willow is a little bit like cult classic status, so maybe sub out that for Princess Bride.
Ooh,
because that's a book and a movie.
Yeah,
it is a book and a movie,
and it hits kind of the same tone as far as the dark to light spectrum.
Oh yeah, I think we might do that. Doc, remind me after the show, because I'll forget.
Remember. But you can listen to the episode and remember that.
Yeah, and the movie was awesome. Marriage.
It looks really good too if you haven't read it. It's a little different. A lot of William Goldman's authorial voice in there, but it's fun. Like it's a fun read.
And so, if you watch the movie, there's the iconic. Everyone does their to show their nerd creds. They have their preacher read their marriage vows, like that one in the show.
Marriage.
True love. All right, Doc. Before we get any creds in, the students hate us.
You have no cred, JR. Just give it up. So, but as everybody here knows, we love both the fantastical and the science fiction. But which one is your favorite? Which one was your first love?
So for first love, honestly, probably sci-fi, and that is because I was a child of the 90s, and so my first big series exposure as a kid was K.A. Applegate's Animorphs, which is a series that is shockingly dark for its intended age group.
Okay. Was that was your first exposure too?
Like independently reading on my own, like not like my mom reading to us at bedtime or that kind of thing. Like I dove into that series when I was entirely too young for it, full of teenage kids turning into animals to fight a guerrilla terrorist war against invading mind controlling aliens and committing war crimes along the way. And it definitely shaped the writer I ended up becoming.
Well, so anybody that's served in a certain era that we like to call the global war on terror, we know that it's not a war crime the first time. So I'm just saying.
Bad joke, JR.
No comment.
Too
We're
soon?
going to edit that out in post, I assume.
No, there's actually a guy that it's a comedian that does a lot of funny YouTube videos, and that's his tagline. He's the fat electrician on YouTube, and it's all like military factoids because he used to be a grunt, just like I was. And that was so funny that he put it on a T-shirt, which I have ordered one of. It's not a war
Oh,
crime.
my heavens. This is why JR isn't allowed out in public, people. I'm sorry.
It's one of those things where I wish I thought of it first, just like quack bang out. I mean, come on.
Anyways, we're moving on from JR's issues. So, what was your first memory of speculative fiction? Was it reading it, watching it? I'm not really sure there was much
It
else.
would have been my
Games.
It would have been my mom reading Narnia to me when I was a kid. And that,
Oh,
that
your
also
mom
was a
read
big
good
memory.
books.
Oh yeah, she did. Like it's funny. I've just got such a like distinct memory of her reading The Magician's Nephew, because she went through in the like 1 through 7 order instead of the order of publication. And me just being like fully enraptured by like Dickory and the Magic Rings and just this story, and like it really sort of opening up for me. And I couldn't have been that old. I must have been like 5 or 6 at the time. Yeah, that's the one that stuck with me. I've got several editions of Narnia, and I actually just recently went through and reread the whole series, and you know, it hits that warm fuzzy childhood spot.
So did she do the voices?
She did a little bit. My mom's not the most like theatrical type of person, but she is very creative, so she definitely got into it. I don't know. It's been a few decades since my mom has read me a story.
Aw.
You could fix that. Call her when we're off the interview.
JR, not everybody has that kind of a relationship with that you have with your mother.
No, I should give her a call.
If you're listening, you should
Next
call your mom
podcast
too,
episode.
people.
I'm a mother, so I can't say that either of you shouldn't call your mother, because the answer is always yes, except for when she's sleeping.
Time zones may vary. So you've talked about like your first memory of speculative fiction, but what is it about that sort of umbrella that is spec fic and all that it includes? What is it about that you love so much?
I think it's the way that it opens up the possibilities and the stories that are being told. Like, obviously, I love like a good thriller or mystery or action adventure set in the real world as much as anybody else. But once you introduce any speculative element, whether it be like, oh, and by the way, there are ghosts, or there's thought police out there preventing future crime, it just opens up like a whole what if continuum of storytelling choices that our real world physics are sadly limited by.
Okay. So do you like, I guess if it's got the magic in modern, does that make it urban fantasy, Doc, or is it paranormal? Where are the lines on that?
Magic and modern?
Yeah, if you have it in modern world, like he's talking about the pre-crime stuff, it's sort of modern world-esque and essentially
I think
magic.
that would be called urban fantasy. They're trying to rename it into contemporary, but I think paranormal is less magic, more just ghost. Yeah, but I could be wrong, and somebody is welcome to argue with me in the comments about it.
Instead of arguing in the comments, they should reach out and we can have an episode where we talk about it, because I still can't tell the difference when I read the descriptions. I'm like,
yes,
is this paranormal,
JR,
urban?
You can't tell the difference between many colors either. I've seen your matching ability.
This is true, but being colorblind doesn't stop my ability to read. But anyway, so how did your love of speculative fiction as a genre and all the possibilities, which you mentioned you love so much, how did that transition into you deciding to tell your own stories?
I was writing from an early age, like pretty much as soon as I learned to read, I started, making up my own stories and writing them down. Speaking of moms, we actually cleaned out my mom's house a year or two ago and found a bunch of my early attempts. Most of which, if the 15-year-olds think my TikTok is cringe, wait till they see my 6-year-old writings. But yeah, I've always been someone who wanted to tell stories, and because of the things I was into reading and watching and otherwise consuming, those inevitably had some sort of speculative bent to them. And as an adult, that trend continued. I think I can count on one hand the number of like non-genre fic that I've written.
So do you ever foresee yourself sharing those early works with readers? Just a look into the mind of Marshall J. Moore?
No. If I hadn't sent those back to my mom, those would be burned.
Okay. So many authors will let their own real life experiences sort of influence the way they tell stories. Are there any moments that you feel like shape you as a storyteller? From
Yeah, without getting too heavy on this, my dad was my absolute hero, and I looked up to him tremendously. And he passed away very suddenly when I was a late teenager. So a lot of the emotional core of what I write tends to be characters dealing with grief and figuring out how to build a life out of loss, which I think is a really timeless and enduring theme to write on. So that inevitably, in some way, big or small, works its way into most of my stuff.
So you've basically made your dad immortal. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
As long as your
Wait till I
books are
tell
in
you about
print,
my
he's
next
never
book.
gone.
Yeah,
The Cozy Mystery?
Yeah.
I watched this TikTok, Doc. I prepared.
You do, yeah.
I'm so impressed that you actually did work. No, I mean, you work hard. That sounded really much more meaner in my outside of my head than in it.
It's okay, Doc. We love you anyway. Continue.
Anyways, back to torturing Marshall.
Yeah.
So, have you had any cool fan art yet, or somebody cosplay one of your characters?
My wife has made a pretty cool digital art of one of the main supporting cast members who gets a bigger role in the second book. I'm very thrilled with how that turned out, and I'm excited for more artsy people to find my book and make more fan art. Cosplay would be really cool.
So this
I might
episode
know
will
how to
air.
arrange.
This episode airs on March 16th because we're recording this early. So that means if they listen to this and they sign up for your newsletter, so April, could you maybe share that in your April newsletter so that way they could see it if they signed up? Yeah,
probably. Yeah, we could definitely get that fast.
All right, so we will put a special link for your newsletter in the show notes. I know it's on your website, but we'll directly link it, and they can sign up, and you can share with that cool art because I know you didn't come prepared today.
Thank you. That would be really amazing.
All right, Doc, back to you.
Okay, so what was it like the first time somebody asked for your autograph?
So this is really fun. One of my absolute best friends in the world was my best man at my wedding. He was also a vendor this past Dragon Con. His family runs a digital tabletop business. Basically, they have really nice, like high-end, hand-furnished tabletops that they convert with an LED screen into all your D&D mat digital asset needs.
Nice.
It's called All Father, AWL Father. Little pun on Norse mythology. But they were Dragon Con this past year as vendors as well. And so first thing in the morning, like 10 minutes before the vendor mart opened, my best friend and his family came up and they all bought copies of my book. So they got to be the first ones, which was really nice.
So if I recall correctly, that was the first time you'd even ever seen a real physical version of your book.
Yeah, like 10 minutes before.
Right?
We had to basically place like a special order with a printer that the publisher hadn't used before to get some copies in time for Dragon Con. And I don't think it would have been possible if I didn't already live in Atlanta.
That can happen. There are advantages to Atlanta despite all of its traffic.
Yes.
So,
living very close to the con is nice.
So have you caught anybody yet reading one of your books out there in the wild?
I wish. One day. That's the dream.
So when that happens, how are you going to react? Are you going to like squeal like a schoolgirl or are you going to play cool?
I'm going to like sidle up real casual and be like, hey, what you reading? Is that any good?
Okay.
I like the way this guy writes. He sounds handsome.
Oh, he is so subtle, huh?
And they're going to be like, geez, guy, he's married. It says in his bio.
Exactly. It's right there.
And his wife is adorable, in case you haven't seen her. She's adorable.
Yes, she is.
He has to say
I love
that
how he looks over to the side. We now know where she's sitting.
Blink twice if you need help.
So what is your funniest fan interaction story so far?
So one of my day jobs is as a substitute teacher. And last spring, I took a long-term assignment for a high school biology class. And the youths have, in fact, found my TikTok and judged me cringe.
What do they know? Kids these days.
Not biology.
Oh, that's fine. You don't teach that subject.
Yeah.
You can't be blamed.
So
They would agree.
So this is the part of the interview where we ask you, Marshall, for everything you have written. So can we get the Reader's Digest version of your body of work?
Yes. So I have written the Rise to Resurrection trilogy. That is the Pale City and its sequels, the Ashen City, and the forthcoming third book, the Awoken City. I'm currently in process on a cozy fantasy about a pirate, and have a few more projects lined up down the pipe. I've also written either 30 or close to 30 short stories that have been published in various venues. About half of those are some of the pro SFWA qualifying markets, and others are more indie ones. And those range from samurai hunting ghosts or samurai ghost hunters to people being turned into corn through the horrors of bioengineering to steampunk machines run by ghosts. Sorry, ghosts are like a theme here. Just or to like the last dragon, unicorn, and giant on Earth watching Noah's Ark fade into the distance. Yeah, that was a really sad and fun one to write. So yeah,
So
my short stories run all over the place in terms of tone and theme and content, but they're really fun to write.
First off, the good news, people, is he's old enough that he knows who to call if the ghosts come. So shut up, Doc. I can see your face. So when you do these short stories, is it like when you look at them, do you like, man, I really like to turn this into a novel or a series, or are you content to leave them all as short stories and you walk away?
For some of them, it has been a little bit of a test run to see if the concept is worth expanding into a full. And usually if they get picked up, it might be. I've got 3 different recurring characters I've had who I've written more than one short story about, so that have gotten published. So clearly there's some market for them. I mentioned briefly there's a samurai ghost hunter one is one of my recurring ones. I've got about 50% of a novel for that one written, but it's historical fantasy and it's for a culture that's not mine, so I've got to do a lot of research to make sure I'm getting things, not horrifically inaccurate.
Okay. So I can't write a short story that I couldn't envision 20 books in. Unfortunately, I only have so much time to write. So yeah, I feel your pain. And we do love short stories, so we'll definitely have to have you back to talk about some of those because I'm pretty passionate. That's my thing, in addition to novels. But having said that, what was the very first thing you published? Was it a short story or did you start with a novel?
It was a short story. It wasn't the first thing I'd written. I'd written 2 full novel manuscripts at that point, and in early 2019, after doing the whole agent querying and rejection thing twice, I decided I need to get better at writing, and the way to do that is to change my focus to short stories. It was a call for submissions for a little indie publication called Grumpy Old Gods. So it was retelling of like myths from all over the world in modern day. So I came up with a story about a demigod daughter of Artemis, who is a private eye, basically my riff on the classic urban fantasy detective trope. And they liked it and published it, and that was actually like the first thing I wrote to a submission call, so that was a huge confidence boost. If I was getting a bunch of submission call rejections, I don't know that I would have kept going like I did. But I wrote 2 more following her for that same series, Grumpy Old Gods. So she's in the first 3 books of that. And then a 4th one that got published in a anthology from Flame Tree, which was my first professional right sale. I actually do have a full novel for that one that I also attempted the agent queries, and it did get a few full manuscripts requests, but never quite made it past that stage. So I'm revisiting that and seeing if I can tighten it and send it in for another shot. later this year.
So that answers the question. You write mostly traditionally for published stuff?
Yeah. I mean, for the short stories, I cast a pretty wide net. There was a period of time during 2020 when most of my day job stuff was shut down. So I turned my attention fully to the short stories, and I was literally every market that was open I could find, I was writing a story for. These days, I'm much more focused on either the professional paying ones or my longer work that I can promote myself. But yeah, my 2 books are traditionally published. The Awoken City and the Pale City, the Awoken City, Ashen City. Those are all with Shadow Alley Press, so those are all trad published. The Cozy Pirate Fantasy, I am planning on self-publishing.
Okay. So you've got, I mean, I looked at your website and the list of covers for your various short stories is impressive. So is there any plan in your future, and obviously IP rights are a thing, they revert at various schedules. Is there any plan at some point to put them all together in a collection?
I would love that. And it would honestly be kind of a vanity project for me because I find that for anthology short story collections by a specific author, people have to know who that author is. And I don't think I'm quite there yet as far as my audience. But one day, a few years down the road, I would absolutely love to have them all compiled in one place and put out there.
Yeah, but they've got to find you somehow. So if you have them already compiled, there you go. That's just one more title. So while all of that sounds fascinating, and I could talk forever about short stories because I love it, Doc is rolling her eyes at me and telling me it's time to say we are going to shamelessly shill for the man this time as we prepare for that lovely commercial interlude.
From R. Max Tilsley, author of Brains, the post-apocalyptic pick-a-path adventure with more than 60 endings, comes the Susie Steele Adventures. Susie has a heart of gold, a set of bad dreams, and a hidden destiny. 6 months ago, Susie's father went to work and never returned, leaving Susie to her hobby of chasing away nannies. That is, until the mysterious and glamorous Cassandra roars into her life, driving a red sports car and promising to be the best of friends. When Susie stumbles on her father's secret lair, a world of magic, ghosts and mysteries beckons. Can she discover the truth, avoid being expelled from school, and keep a ruthless secret society off her back? She's to have a ghost of a chance. She'll need the help of her best friends, one grumpy cat, and a whole lot of daring. The Susie Steele Adventures from R. Max Tilsley. Book 1, The Steel Trap. Book 2, The Steel Bite. Perfect for readers 9+. Available in print and ebook.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. Thank you, R. Max Tilsley, for sponsoring it. He's one of our favorite Aussies. So mostly because we don't know that many. But let's not dally and get right to the book that brought us here. So let's talk about The Pale City, which is the first book in the Rites of Resurrection series. So where did you get the premise for this universe? How did you come up with sort of the idea?
So if I go way, way back, it came from me and one of my friends messing around with D&D and me trying to create a actually viable necromancer. And then expounding from that, thinking about, okay, how do we make necromancers the good guys? Well, I mean, zombies are basically just robots, right? Like you can use them the same way. And from there, I started thinking, okay, what does a society that uses zombies for its labor look like? And the entire concept of the world, and then the story that I would write from that spilled out from there.
Okay, I can dig that. So what version or campaign or whatever of D&D were you playing when you were inspired for this? Was it 5e? Was it certain setting?
It was 5e, and it was really just like talking about stuff rather than us like actively doing a campaign. Just, normal nerd conversation. Okay.
I just know there's a lot of various settings, and some are darker than others. So I was curious what flavored it. But before we get started too deeply on this novel, specifically the Pale City, what would the age range be for your audience? Because we have families that listen, and sometimes they read together. So what would you say the age range for the Pale City is?
14 plus. There is a slight scattering of language, a lot of violence, and one scene that takes place in a brothel, though nothing explicit actually happens.
Okay. Doc, while you get the question, I will pull up the cover because it's too glorious not to share. All right, and it's you, Doc.
I really love this. Did you have any hand in this wonderful cover because it definitely feels very straight scene drawn from the book.
It definitely is. My publisher basically requested I provide them 3 options, mostly of scenes or at least cool images from the book, and I gave them 3 options, and this is the one they picked. I really like it. I think it does a good job showing our main character Cassius, who clearly is a necromancer. Look at him with his little bone accoutrements and his magic and the sword, because he's also a soldier, and that, you know, clearly this is a guy who has both of those archetypes, and the tension there is part of what I find interesting about the character. It was a little tricky, I think, identifying that the zombies behind him are zombies because they're all masked, which I'll get to when we start talking more about the world building and the setting, which is why I wanted to have one of them like removing the mask to show that it is in fact a decaying corpse underneath. And then we've got the, you know, looming cityscape in the background because the city itself really is like such an integral part of the book that, you know, I gave it the title. So
I really enjoy this one. I think it really stands out among all the science fiction covers, both because it's not dark, or sorry, not science fiction, fantasy covers. It's not dark, but it has enough color. And it still goes with some of those Hallmark tropes. Like you look at this cover and you know it's fantasy immediately. You know there's sword and sorcery. So I enjoy this cover. I think it's good.
Thank you.
So
he drew it himself. He's being humble and modest, but he actually drew that.
That is absolutely my artistic sensibilities are not visual.
No, but Shadow Alley Press does some very nice covers, and they definitely did good by you on that.
They did. The second and third books covers are also really cool, and they do a thing where it's sort of light, and this this is a very light toned cover. They get progressively darker, like the scene sort of changes from day to night, which is really cool looking. Like the second one is sort of like dusk colors, oranges and purples, and then the third one is like dark.
So before we move on to the next one, Doc, I have a question for you, Marshall. So obviously this one is, if I zoom in, it gets a little pixelated because, you know, the ones you can grab quickly on a Google search are generally the sales copy. So they're the thumbnail almost. Mm-hmm. So have you seen this in high resolution, and is it so much cooler? Like what level of details, if it was high res, could they see?
Let me actually pull up my physical copy.
Because I know these, you know, if they're high res enough where they've got the level of detail, I know a lot of people are like, I want that on a poster on my wall if they like books. So, but not all covers these days lend themselves to that, I don't think.
Yeah. It's actually, there's not a whole lot more detail than what you can see there. There's a little bit more just shading, I guess, when you zoom in on like the character and their stances, the individual, both the hero and the zombies look a lot more distinct from one another as far as their posture. And you can definitely, the one directly above the sword that's removing the mask, so you can see it's a zombie. The face underneath it looks a lot more mummified, where on this it's just kind of a blur. Kind of looks like he's smiling, but I promise it's a death rictus.
Okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt, Doc. You can get back to your regularly scheduled questioning.
JR, you're funny. So can you give us
like zombies, all right? Jeez.
I know, but we're going about ready to ask. Can you give us like a 30-second elevator pitch for the Pale City?
Yes. All right. In a city where all of the making me laugh, throwing off my 30 seconds. All right. In a city where all of the dead are repurposed into zombie servants used for war and manual labor, the only person who can save his republic from a sinister conspiracy threatening to undermine the society he has dedicated his life to serving is a wounded necromancer struggling to find purpose in his civilian life after an injury takes him away from the battlefield.
So do you dive into what that means for life and death when even in death you're not free?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the driving world building question of the book is what happens to a society where the dead are just another tool to exploit, another resource. There's a lot of more nuances to the tension. part of the reasoning that I used to come up with a city that uses necromancy as, such a matter of daily life that no one really even pays it that much mind is that it would, by nature, have to be an extremely utilitarian society. So there was a lot of tension between sort of utilitarian philosophy versus like the main character is part of a religious minority which reveres the dead and their ancestors. And so a lot of the character's internal conflict comes from him trying to balance these two halves of himself as a soldier who serves this society that is fundamentally incompatible with the tenets of his religion.
So what can you tell us about your zombie specifically? I know it's a little bit of world building. We're going a little out of order, but like, are they the fast moving ones like you see, like, I don't know, World War Z, or are they shambling along? Are they decaying, in which case smell is an issue because, you got a bunch of rotting meat bags walking around.
These
You
are
have a
great
thriving,
questions.
I don't know.
No, those are exactly the questions I was asking myself when I was coming up with, like, how does this society function? So they're not fast. They're not exactly shambling, but they are definitely the slow, limbs stiffened by rigor mortis. They're used specifically in the book for like manual labor and of varieties that don't require a lot of like physical dexterity or cognition. As far as the smell, I actually do pay some mind to that. There's mentioned that a lot of them have incense sensors either on their person or in the buildings where they are. And then also there's an alchemical treatment that they use basically to slow down the rate of decay. I think I established somewhere in the books that it's like an average lifespan, so to speak, of like 10 to 12 years before the natural processes catch up. But yeah, these are all things that I did have to consider.
Okay. All right, Doc, back to you. I'm sorry I interrupted again.
No, that's fine. We've definitely talked some about what makes this series special. You've done a very, I think too many people kind of go, ooh, necromancer, they must be bad, and then continue on instead of really like, what do you do in a society full of them? Not everybody is an evil necromancer. So what tropes did you really play with in Pale City?
Yeah. So one of them is that exactly to your point of, the pop culture image of a necromancer is a guy in black robes cackling madly while his skeletons tie a virgin to an altar. And I went the exact opposite route of that, of this extremely utilitarian society where it's totally stripped of any of the Gothic themes or aesthetic. It's just in fact, aesthetically, the world is much more Roman inspired, because the flip side of that, of like, how do you have a society of necromancers that you can at least sympathize with? My thought was that, okay, if this is a society where the people are no longer in a agrarian society, they don't have to devote all of their time to maintaining that agrarian society. That would lead to some more enlightened social modes, one would think. So it's actually a democratic republic, which is not common in the fantasy genre.
Okay. I'm trying not to laugh because I'm like
just
bombarding.
This one for those who can't see the chat. JR is putting bad necromancer puns in the chat.
I'm just laying down. Oh my god.
There's more, but all right, we'll try to stop this from becoming the silly hour. I haven't drank nearly enough for that. And instead I'll ask you, aside from it obviously being fantasy and military fantasy, it sounds like, what subgenres or genres do you think the story fits into?
So my favorite way to pitch it is to tell people that it's high fantasy, but it's wearing an urban fantasy trench coat. As far as the structure and pacing and even the first person narration, Dresden Files is a big inspiration for me. So it definitely falls into, it's a secondary world urban fantasy almost, which is not something we see a whole lot of. It's got elements of military fantasy, and there is actually a single flashback scene to his active service days which if I ever did want to do a spin-off series, it would probably be something following the more military aspects of the world. But it's mostly just straight classic high fantasy that just happens to take place in one location and involves a mystery.
Okay.
It's also got some political thriller elements.
I can dig that. The story. Now let's talk about the story itself. So you've hinted a little bit about the main character, but I don't think you fully fleshed him out. So what can you tell us if you're selling your main character, this wounded gentleman? Like how would you pitch him to a reader to make them care enough to want to pick the book up?
Yes. So Cassius is one of the city's legates, which are the necromancer generals responsible for leading the attendants, that's the zombies, into war. So he's wounded prior to the start of the book, and he's a extremely conscientious, patriotic individual who takes his various duties and obligations very seriously. And part of how he's always defined himself is as a soldier in service to this republic. And so when his injury prevents him from controlling the zombies like he used to be able to, because there's a physical component to the magic, it's sort of got a very martial arts kata-esque quality to it. He has to grapple with, like, who am I if I can't do the thing that I have used to define myself? And then what also makes him interesting, like I've alluded to, is the fact that his religion, which is actually the source of the magic system that the necromancy in the world relies upon, is one of ancestor worship and veneration, and is somewhat oppressed by the society which he's dedicated his life to serving. Because obviously, if all of the dead are just tools to be used, and your religion, requires that you venerate them, then those two things are going to naturally come into conflict. So it's that tension between these conflicting duties and loyalties to two things that he holds in equally high regard is where the fascination of that character comes for me.
So the trope of I don't even know if it's a trope, the kind of idea that a soldier coming back wounded and wonders who he is without the uniform he wore, that strikes close to home. I think that exists in fiction because it exists in real life. So did you have any exposure to that? What made you decide to pick that as sort of the backdrop for his story?
So I grew up as a brat. My dad was in the Army, so I definitely have exposure to a lot of military veterans and their families growing up. Just throughout my life, that was normal. And seeing various levels of transition out of the lifestyle and into the civilian one. From a more personal level, it comes with me growing up with a very heavily instilled sense of patriotism, and then coming to a more mature understanding as an adult of where our country has fallen short through its history in living up to the ideals we profess as a nation. A lot of this book is informed by that, kind of in terms with the distance between America as she proclaims herself to be, and ideally how we strive to make our nation, and the actuality where we have fallen short of that.
Okay. Okay. So was that, given your exposure growing up, was that aspect of it cathartic to write, or was it a little harder for you?
I'd say it was cathartic. These are all things that I've worked out myself beforehand, as a fully formed adult, rather than working them out through my book, which, is another path I could have taken.
Don't judge.
But no, not at all. But the character going through that journey himself, and, not to spoil anything, but ultimately the conclusion he arrives at definitely was something that mirrors my own experience.
Okay. That's one of the reasons that the number of veterans that, end up unaliving themselves is because they have that trouble making that reconnection back to life after. So yeah. I think it's a fascinating topic. But we've talked about a little bit about how the society internally handles the zombies and such. How does the rest of the world in which this story takes place handle the fact that their, enemies or allies are, like, basically stealing dead bodies and, enslaving them?
Not well. The setting is basically that they are one very small, isolated mountain range of this main city and several outlying provinces, and everyone on all their borders absolutely hates them because scary necromancer is bad. And that does tie into the plot, as it turns out. Like I said, one of the flashback scenes is him in a battle on their borders, defending themselves. But the thing about being a army that 90% of your soldiers are dead already is it's real easy to replenish your ranks after every fight.
This is true.
Yeah.
It's kind of dark, but I like it.
Resource management jokes.
All right, so obviously, like the Cassius is a main character, but what about any secondary characters in the story? Do you have any that you were especially memorable for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I mentioned, a lot of the inspiration for the pacing and tone of the story comes from urban fantasy, and usually there is some sort of cop or authority figure who is a nominal ally but has some sort of tension with the protagonist, because they're working within the confines of the system versus outside of it. And so in this case, it is Horatia, who is one of the city's magistrates, she and her brother were childhood best friends with Cassius. Said brother is recently dead in the same battle that took Cassius's that injured him and prevented him from being able to continue his soldiering. So there is a huge amount of tension between them as they have to overcome their personal obstacles with one another while also working together to solve this mystery. I also really enjoy Balani is another significant character, and that is the high priestess of his religion, from which he has been apostate for a while, and he has to come to her seeking help. And there's a lot of history and similar tension from an opposite side in that relationship.
So in this story, do the zombies have agency in that they would almost count as a secondary character, or are they just more automaton machines that just happen to resemble humans?
They're much more automatons. They're basically flesh robots, was my take.
Okay. All right, Doc, back to you. You're up next.
But I'm having fun making fun of you.
And you're sharing all the jokes that I worked really hard to steal from the internet.
Well,
So-
it doesn't count if I just steal them from you. That's your plagiarism issue.
That's right, I already stole them fair and square.
So, given all of this, if your characters found you in a back alley, how do you think you'd fare if they knew who you were?
So my immediate reaction to this was, oh no, I'd be one of the zombies. But as previously mentioned, he is injured at the start of the book, and I do Muay Thai for a living, so I'd probably be okay.
That probably helped when you were teaching as a substitute.
It gets you rowdy. Elbow.
That's right. One in the
Put your
face.
phone away. Knee.
I mean,
See, now everyone that's a teacher
kind of needs that direct approach, so it works.
2x4 to the forehead works really well. All right, Doc. Back to you. Back to you.
So, do you have a favorite character archetype that you like to use?
Yeah. So one of the ones that has always really appealed to me is, in my initial label for this was like grizzled veteran, but it doesn't have to be necessarily like of the military. Although a few of the immediate examples I can think of, like Mal Reynolds being one, someone with a backstory and past that whatever the inciting incident character is has to slowly tease out of them and get them to open up. Like Joel from The Last of Us, since that's a current thing, great example. Mandalorian, character who has to slowly defrost their ice cold heart because of the arrival of someone who they are forced to love. That is probably one of my favorite archetypes.
I feel like he's talking about my personal life.
Or maybe he's confessing, but his wife's in the same room, so maybe not. All right. So, what can you tell us if we haven't already covered it? Because obviously you've given us a lot of the backstory and we've added a lot of, unplanned questions. But is there anything about the universe writ large that is the set piece for the Pale City that you haven't already said that you thought would be helpful for readers?
So obviously the central conceit of the setting is the tension between the utilitarianism of the society versus the more sentimental, spiritual and religious elements of his religious life, and how that plays out across the story. And especially once you start mixing in political assassinations and conspiracies. The city itself, I think I haven't really talked about enough, but really does play a significant backdrop. It's super atmospheric. It's up in a very narrow mountain valley, which makes them isolated and hard to attack. And there's like a perpetual fog there, and it's full of like these really tall towers. Since they don't have a whole lot of space, they have to build upwards rather than out, which really is a very fun classic fantasy way for me to give it that big city Dashiell Hammett noir vibe. And it's perpetually foggy, and really the scene descriptions were so fun for me to write, and I think it really shines through in the book as far as establishing why the Pale City is significant enough in its own right to earn the title place.
So some people don't do it this way. Did you actually draw a layout for the city, or you just sort of wing it as you write and picture it in your head?
I have a rough idea in my head, but someone asked me not too long ago, like if I was ever going to do a map or if I had made a map, and I was like, no, because then I would contradict myself in a later book and I would never hear the end of it from fans.
That's fair.
Oh, it's like you've met Dakota's fans.
So when you wrote this city, I mean, obviously you're not giving us an exact map, but was it inspired by any existing city, or you were just sort of creating what you needed for the setting?
So yes, to the first question, but almost retroactively, the idea was that since it's like a high alpine valley, it would be sort of a Switzerland-esque. Like I've visited Switzerland briefly when I was in college, and was really just taken by how beautiful it is and how like you have these gorgeous rugged mountain peaks and the like looming over these beautiful lush rolling hills and valleys. But then more recently, I visited Andorra on a trip from France to Spain. And Andorra, for those who don't know, is a very tiny country sandwiched between Spain and France, up in the Pyrenees Mountains. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is the setting for my book. Like, it's the right size. It's the mountains on either side. It's the narrow valley with a river running through it. I was like, this is literally what I was trying to write.
That's cool. So happenstance.
Yeah, exactly. Serendipity.
That happens. I've talked to a lot of authors that they've inadvertently done that, and whether it's fact meets like the function meets form kind of thing, it just sort of happens. Even to the point where they designed an author we know who designed a castle on a hill, and then they gave it to the artist, and they're like, "That's an actual real castle. Here's what it is. Here's the sketch." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So yeah, it's kind of cool how that happens.
Yeah.
So. All right. This book is part of a series. There are currently 3 books out in the series. But what's next for the Resurrection? Is it the Resurrection?
Rites of Resurrection.
Yeah. What's next for that series? Is their story done at the trilogy?
So, the slight correction, there are 2 books currently out, The Pale City and The Ashen City. The 3rd book, The Awoken City, is going to be released in April. I believe April 11th is the date for that.
I must have seen the pre-order then. Okay.
Yeah, no, the pre-order just went live like last week, so it's new. So my thought is that for a world-building central story, which is what this one is, every story is going to revolve around either character, plot, or world. And in my case, it's world. The central question is dealing with, what does a society that relies on necromancy for labor look like? And I think that question is sufficiently answered by the third book in the series. So with these characters, those who make it through to the end, I think their story is wrapped up by the third book, and I don't have any desire to revisit them. That said, I could see myself doing a spin-off series in the future. I know I've mentioned that it's very tangential to the military fantasy side of it, but I could probably easily do a spin-off just following like zombie army on a campaign and the necromancers leading them. But no solid plans yet.
Okay. So we know that every literary universe, at least the good ones, have their own internally consistent rules of science, technology, and magic. So this is very obviously fantasy and magic based. But other than necromancy, what can we expect from magic in this universe?
So it's all tied to necromancy in somehow. The rites, which is where the title comes from, rites of resurrection, are like I mentioned earlier, a quasi martial arts sort of magic system where basically you're puppeteering the zombies through rehearsed motions that are basically shorthand for do a punch motion that's telling the zombie to stab or that kind of thing.
It's almost like a kata.
Yes, very much kata based. My martial arts doesn't have kata, but I've done enough of them that I was familiar with the concept, and it made sense to incorporate that. There are deeper versions of it. At some point during the first book, the main character is able to assume direct control of them, like seeing through one of the zombies' eyes. But that's requires obviously a lot more focus and concentration. But it's more of a puppeteering sort of thing than the traditional, corpses down, raise the corpse. Although he can and does do that. And then later into the series, it sort of delves more into the spiritual side of things. One thing, the end of the very first chapter, he uses his training to view the last memories of a dead person's life, which is not something most of the people in this world can do, but that comes from his religious background. And there's a few other necromancy related and necromancy adjacent happenings that occur in the second and third books that I can't reveal without spoiling. So it's all necromancy, but it's different kinds.
So is the necromancy, is the magic in this world, is it innate to the person, as in they're just born with it or they're not, or is it a skill that anybody could learn?
It's learned. There's only a finite number of people who are trained in it at any given time in his society. And partially that's, the idea is it's sort of the same idea as keeping, like I said, the society is very Roman inspired, and the Romans had pretty strict rules regarding like their generals and their conduct to prevent them from all, staging coups all the time. So like, for example, his position can never hold public office. And they only train so many legates at a time to prevent any of them from getting out of hand and getting ideas.
Okay. Well, it didn't work out so well for Rome, but hopefully it works better in the Pale City.
I guess we'll have to read it to find out.
Is it an audiobook as well?
Not yet. I am hopeful that it will become one, but I'm not sure where the plans are on that at the moment.
All right, Doc, we're on 35 because I've been going all out of order and messing you up this time. Turnabout's fair play.
Yes, I have noticed, believe it or not, but that's okay. You're just excited, and it's adorable in that hyper puppy kind of way. So, do you have, other than the undead, do you have any fantastic creatures in here?
No, it's pretty much, it's humans and zombies, and that's about it.
Okay. So I think at this point it's kind of everything's winding down. Is there anything we haven't touched on though in your universe that you want to talk about?
I'm trying to think. All three books take place in the city. I touch on other locations and make reference to them, but with the exception of that one flashback scene, it's all a single city location. But I do like the hints that I've dropped about the other places, so they might be worth exploring in future. We'll see.
Well, if this does really well with your fans, and you may end up doing utilizing those other settings, hopefully.
Yeah, that'd be very fun if it does.
So is your cozy mystery set in this world?
No, solely. So it's cozy fantasy, which is a new and growing subgenre. Basically, Studio Ghibli, but books is the way I would pitch it. No, it's pirate centric. So solely for the difference in tone between them, I had to set it in a completely different continuity.
Okay. So, well, you know, someone's got to get me. All right. So clear, Doc, stop. Clearly, the interview is winding down. But was there anything about the Pale City, the first book, and the Rites of Resurrection that we didn't ask that you want to tell us before we wrap this up?
I think you guys got a real good slate of questions, and I talked probably more than I should have about the world building process, and definitely managed to touch on the characters and the gist of the plot. If you like urban fantasy, high fantasy, political thrillers, or any combination of the above, check out this book, dear listener.
Okay, and so with that being said, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, so do your part, people. Rumor has it when he gets his 100th review, they send him a unicorn and he can make steak. So his wife desperately wants to know if they make a good steak or not. So you wouldn't want to deprive her of that. She'll stab him if you do. All right.
Not everybody has a stabby wife like Nick does, JR.
Oh, that's not normal? Dang, I thought I was the odd one. Okay. So, Marshall, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, all the links will be in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. My website, marshalljmoore.com, is where you can find an up-to-date list of all my currently published books, my forthcoming books, and my currently published short stories. It also has a sign-up form to my newsletter and a contact form, as well as links to my other socials. You can find me primarily on TikTok at Marshall J. Moore Author. I am on Facebook at facebook.com/KWAJ Marshall, Quaj Marshall. Twitter at Quaj14 with a capital K, capital KWAJ14, and Instagram at Marshall J. Moore Author.
So what is Quaj KWAJ? What does that mean?
That is Kwajalein, the island I was born on.
Oh, okay. That works. So
Yep.
were you there because your dad was stationed there or something?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And last question for you before I give our socials is, what made you decide to make TikTok your main platform?
That was my wife's mastermind. She had been doing her research on ways to self-promote and self-market, and I think she literally said to me one day, she was like, "We're going to make you a TikTok account. We're going to make you go viral and sell your book that way," and it works. So,
I mean,
like
you can't
always,
argue
she was
with
right.
it. Make sure you write that in your calendar just in case you forget. All right. And you can find us, dear listener, at our Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Send all of your hate mail to Doc Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. You can find us on our Facebook page where all the shenanigans happen at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. You can find us on our Facebook page, separate from the group. If you search for it and type it in and like and follow and do the parts, we don't quite have enough to give it a dedicated URL, but 3 guesses of what it'll be when we get it. And finally, we have our website. Doc, stop laughing. We have our website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can support the show and keep the podcast moving. Overhead does exist, people, and servers like to get paid when you use them. So if it's something in your heart to do, we would greatly appreciate it. And you can also support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that's for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver surrenders.
Never surrender.
All right, bring it home, Doc.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. This was for J.R. Handley, the absentee Nick Garber. This was the Blasters and Blaze podcast. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, and enjoying our love of torturing JR, because why not? Along with all the cheesy fandom, geeky nerd stuff too, that we all know we all love.
All right, before we let you go, last question. This is the serious one. Determines if you get to come back. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
I grew up in the tropics, man. It's got to be yay.
Yes!
Oh, you're dead to me, Marshall. You're dead to me.